All right, Matt. So right here, I'm Johnny Bencourt from Clutch Prep, and I'm here with Matt Minus.
Hey.
So Professor Matt Minus. So if you could just introduce yourself really quickly, and then we'll get started.
My name is Mathew Minus. I'm a second year professor at Prairie View A&M University, and I teach chemistry.
Awesome. And let's just go over like section basics. How many sections do you teach? About how many students,
Right.
etc.
So I teach this semester, I teach two labs and I teach two lectures. And my two lectures are nursing or pre-nursing, and there's chemistry for nurses. And so it's actually two sections of around 50 students each. And they are all basically learning, going through chemistry in one semester to prepare for the HESI exam.
Got it. Excellent. And what we're going to be talking about today is your experience using Clutch Prep in one of those classrooms this fall. And it's interesting that you have an interesting setup in terms of that you decided to use Clutch Prep for some of your sections and not all of them. And if you could just kind of share a little bit about the strategy of how you're using Clutch Prep, not like the specific products, but just how did you decide on using it with your sections this semester?
My background is like research science, and it's like a research scientist in me. I wanted to evaluate Clutch Prep, and so the best way to do that was to informally, set up one class that has it and can use it as a resource, and then have another class that maybe uses the normal resources, right? Because we're always, as teachers, we're in the classroom, we're always experimenting for basically new content and new ideas, anything that can give our students the edge of learning, right? And that's where we sort of should be, right? We don't want to be in the back of what we used to do and we're just doing it because we did, but we should always be pushing forward to what's the next thing that can help our students learn, right? And so Clutch Prep, when you guys reached out to me, it was just a great opportunity to see like, hey, here's this new tool, and can it help, right? Can it help us learn?
Awesome. So in the context of, just for context in this call, we're going to be talking about Clutch Prep in the context of this informal split test, where one of your sections is utilizing it, one of your sections is not utilizing, and
Right.
talking about, if maybe we've been noticing any differences between the way that students are relating to material in those two classes.
Right. So I can definitely say qualitatively, like the confidence is big, right? There's a huge confidence difference in terms of the way the students answer questions in class, being familiar with the material. And I think that even the depth at which the students know it, I had the Clutch Preppers, they can go in and do the homework and come in sort of informed and ready to discuss. Whereas to the other class, I'm going to have to just bring them in and sort of spoon feed the information. And then maybe towards the end, we can get to sort of a discussion style lecture, right? And so it just makes a night and day difference in learning environment. And in the end, I think it sort of accelerates what you can do in a classroom.
Awesome. So that's great to hear. And I want to hear more about maybe some of the direct and indirect differences that you're observing in
Right.
these sections. Why don't we go ahead and start back from the beginning though, and talk about the journey that got you here and how you decided to even use Clutch Prep in the beginning. So one of the questions that I wanted to lead off with was, you said that I guess this is your second year teaching.
Right.
And before this year, had you already tried any new technologies in your classroom
Okay.
prior to using Clutch Prep?
So teaching background. So I taught high school actually for 2 years before I went to graduate school. And that was an experience in itself, an immersion. And then when I went to grad school, obviously you teach a couple classes as a TA and assist. And then by the time I got to college, I sort of am familiar now with the transition between high school and college, because in high school, I see my students every day. I see them for an hour a day, and we're covering half the material in twice the time, right? And so the paradigm of college is that we have to cover almost twice the material as a high school teacher. You're covering the whole year, and
Yep.
you're only meeting 2-3 times a week, right? And this is where enters sort of a resource like a Clutch Prep, where it's like I can actually cover the material in class, but you have another 3 hours or 4 hours of content, which sort of doubles up on the amount of time students get to really get familiar with the content. And so to me, like last year, sort of seeing that paradigm, right, where it's like you don't really have enough time, to seeing a resource that maybe can add to the time that they get, it makes a huge, I was like, hey, this sounds like a great idea.
Awesome. So which tools were you using right before, Clutch Prep, the conversation with Clutch Prep started? What was kind of your study plan or your suite of tools that you were using with your students?
Right. So for me, I try to keep it standard, right? Like you start with the basics and you add to it. So maybe like PowerPoint, the manufacturer is going to have their own slides, homework assignments, vocabulary quizzes, just very basic tools. They study in groups, and you just try to have an interactive classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the textbook is as well, but no type of I noticed, I guess, these students are in the age of sort of video dissemination, right? All the information, if you really look at it, that they ingest outside of a classroom is from video, pretty much, right? Audio, video. There's very little recreational reading, right? Nobody picks up the newspaper anymore, right? But meanwhile, in the classroom, we're still sort of stuck in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where everyone's picking up a textbook or supposed to. And not that there's anything wrong with developing your reading skills, but the fastest way to disseminate information right now is video, right? And so I noticed that my students sort of responded a little bit better to some of the YouTube videos, but the issue was they weren't really tailored to the classroom lessons. And so you sort of have to sparse those in there to just get some type of dissemination. But when, you guys reached out at Clutch Prep and said, hey, we have video lessons that are tailored to what you're teaching in the classroom, I mean, that made a huge difference to me.
Absolutely. So I'm just wondering, you mentioned something about homework assignments. Does that mean were you using any type of online homework, or was it just homework based on the book?
Right. So it's just homework based on the book. They upload it online, write it out
Got
by
it.
hand.
Yeah.
Nothing too sophisticated, right? There
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
that much interaction. And as a college teacher or instructor, right, you're not gonna have that much time, especially if you have 50 students or 300 students. You just can't sit down and hand grade every homework,
Right.
right? And it puts almost the student at a disadvantage because they're not really getting the feedback until the quiz or the test, right? And so having sort of even the homework where they can go in and get feedback immediately, it adds to the learning experience because they can know immediately, hey, I'm not really understanding this, or I need to go back through this, or maybe even I need to go to tutorials, or even
Yeah.
just, but it just gives them way more feedback.
Awesome. Okay, great to hear. So now I understand better where you were at with tools and kind of the unique proposition of using Clutch Prep, how that tool was interesting. Now I want to zoom out and also talk about your classroom. So you mentioned that you have these, chemistry students that want to become nurses. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, classroom demographics, the types of students that you are teaching, and what kind of fields they're interested in pursuing, fields and careers they're interested in pursuing after college, from what you can tell.
Right. So in this particular semester, I'm dealing with pretty much all pre-nurses. So a lot of them want to go into healthcare, and they want to just understand as much chemistry as they can before they take their pre-nursing exam. And that stuff will still come up in nursing school, and it will come up for their state exam. So, solutions, these different things. And so I think that a lot of times, especially depending on, it really depends on your school itself. When you're at a major institution and you're getting sort of the top 5% students in the state, you're getting students with really strong self-study skills.
Mm-hmm.
Really, and I think that for them, not to say that Clutch Prep's not useful for them, it's like that's like candy, but for them, they don't necessarily have to have something to help them or to guide them, or that secondary resource, and you can get away with just throwing them a textbook and saying go fish. Right. But I think for some of my students where they need time to develop the reading skills, they need time to develop different things, coming out of high school, having sort of that video resource really helps ease the pains of chemistry, right? For somebody who's not ready to just pick up a textbook and go.
Something that I picked up on when you're describing your student population is you mentioned that some subset of them are still developing maybe these remedial skills from high school that they didn't fully
Absolutely.
master. So
Absolutely.
does that kind of hint at the fact that maybe you have an like slightly maybe underrepresented student
Yeah.
population that come from maybe Yeah,
For
I
every,
would just love to hear a
yeah,
little bit more about the type of students that are maybe struggling with these high school type
yeah.
uh, competencies.
So Prairie View is an HBCU, right? And so we're serving underrepresented population, and some of them have great high school backgrounds, and they get sort of all this information, and they come in with this ready-made skill set. But then you have this huge sort of shift where some of them really have not gotten the skill set they need, right? They're all capable, but some of them have just not been developed. And I think that a lot of times they used to say like you're teaching at different levels and now you have to stagger your lessons, right? And what Clutch Prep will do, right, is it sort of gives everyone this almost unlimited resource where whatever level they're at, it sort of helps them get up to that next level. Because some of them aren't used to reading scientifically, and some of them are. Some of them aren't used to doing the math. Some of them are, and so having that tool there is major for the people that really aren't used to the college level of rigor.
So it sounds like there is a learning gap between, different sets of your students, and that Clutch Prep is equalizing some of
Right.
these differences that used to be more like pronounced. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that without it, it really comes down to sort of practiced reading level, right? As well as like math skills, and because you can't escape time, right? You can't escape the time that one student has put into the classroom versus the other. But what Clutch Prep does is it gives them a chance to sort of make up some of that time, right?
Yes.
Having the video lessons and having the homework problems, it just gives them a chance to sort of catch up without almost leaving them behind, right? And like I said, the most of the students that you'll find outside of, like I said, the top 5%, struggle reading textbooks, right? And so having that assistant with the textbook makes a huge difference until they can catch up reading level wise.
Wonderful. And now I'm also curious, based on, your student backgrounds, based on the fact that many of these students want to be nurses, has that changed the way you approach, the way you teach or deliver the content in the classroom? Maybe specifically before Clutch Prep, before you were using Clutch Prep, were there any kind of strategies that you were employing in your classroom to kind of tailor it more for their needs?
Right. So to me, I think education has to be tailored, right? Like everyone doesn't need to know what a neutron is, right? Everyone doesn't need to know about, a fission, but what about chemistry is most relevant to nurses? What is it something that they really need to understand, and, what can prepare them for the classes they're going to take? And I think that's sort of content wise how you tailor the class. And then what information is sort of they only need to know on the surface. And so for me, I think that's sort of what I try to do is get to the meat and potatoes of what they need to know, and then maybe just make them familiar with the periphery information.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So now we've talked about the tools you're using. We have a better idea of the types of students and the needs of the students that you have, in your classrooms. I'd love to now switch gears to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, which presented a gigantic challenge to teachers all over the country,
Mhm.
especially in the, natural sciences. There
Right.
are difficulties teaching this content in a live classroom setting, and then remote learning just becomes that much more problematic. And I would love to hear about how did the COVID-19 pandemic immediately impact the way that you had to teach this content?
So I think that a lot of the students are used to that interpersonal face-to-face connection. And when you don't have that, for some of the students, it's really hard for them to get connected to the lecture and the information, right? And I think that also stress, right? Like you're dealing with students that are incredibly stressed. This is an unusual time in American history and period, and it's a lot to deal with. So I think that um, it changes, one, I guess, how much you can be there for the students present, and then two, I think it sort of changes the educational paradigm, in that it has to be a lot more self-directed, right? There's just no way you can be as catering to the students when you're online and at a distance.
And how, maybe you have a classroom that is not using Clutch Prep right now. So,
Right.
you know, um, using that as the standard, how can, what were the actual concrete changes that you made to the way that you delivered content pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic? Like comparing last year's fall class versus this year's fall class, what are the actual concrete ways that the delivery of the content has changed based on the pandemic?
Right. So Zoom is definitely the one way, right? Like everything is by Zoom, and I can record lectures and give them back to the class. But I think that it's not quite the same. And also the speed with which you can move is not quite as fast, right? So I think in terms of, you still might deliver a PowerPoint lecture and you still might have interaction there, but the speed has changed. And the students, some of them follow less. Like you might have a student, and I'm gonna be honest, full disclosure, they might be in the car, right, looking at your PowerPoint, right, because they don't, when it's a Zoom classroom, they have all these different distractions in the background
Yep.
that make it a little bit different than normal. But I would say the way that the main, like the lecture style or is still there. I think it's hard to do as many classroom activities though, right? And so having, like I said, a student-centered based activity for them to do, like maybe homework or interactive homework is really helpful.
Right. So it sounds like due to the cadence of the class changing it, over Zoom,
Right.
without better tools, you would probably cover less material in a
Oh,
COVID
for sure.
semester versus
For
a
sure.
regular semester.
Absolutely. And it's almost no way to cover the same amount of material without a resource like a clutch prep or something like that. Even if, let's say, you fall behind in a class, right? There's still pressure on the instructor to go through certain chapters, right? But with a clutch prep resource, you can just assign those chapters, knowing that the video content's there, the material's being taught, and then you can just be a resource, right? Versus actually having to go in and lecture in those particular chapters. So it just gives you an opportunity to really expand or think about the different ways to cover the content that's already going to be hard to cover.
Wonderful. And, you've already mentioned the challenge of the speed of the class necessarily needing to be just changed without better tools. And you've mentioned that students also are used to that face-to-face. Can you think of any additional challenges or additional unique challenges that the pandemic introduced for you as a professor or for your students that you haven't already mentioned?
I think this the stress is the main, right? Like these are extraordinary circumstances, and trying to do things the exact same way in very, very different conditions is hard enough, right? And maybe you shouldn't try to do things the same way, right? Maybe as a person, you say, you know what, a change is probably a good idea, and maybe a clutch prep or some other resource is that change you need, right? Because like I said, the one thing that is nice is I can go in with the video chapters and assign my class a chapter and say, all right, you have a week or two to cover this, and then we'll go talk about it, right? But it's a possibility now, whereas before there was just no way, right?
Right.
And so I think that it gives you the flexibility to rearrange that schedule in a way that maybe works for both the student and the instructor.
Awesome. So now let's go back and think about, I'd love to just take you back to when you first kind of took the call, the initial call with Clutch Prep, and we did a demo and showed you a little bit about the platform. And I'd love to understand better, what was the problem that you were trying to solve by testing out this platform for your class? Like you said, you mentioned before, you're trying to not overcomplicate the class, you try to keep it simple, and yet you had this openness towards a new tool. So what I'm wondering is, what was the problem that you were trying to solve that kind of motivated you to test something new?
Right. So for me, the issue is content. Like it's really hard in a college semester to get through material. And the students back in the day, sort of the understanding was, here's chapters 1 through 3, right? And the test is going to be on them, and you're responsible for anything in the book, right? That was the, and I think that now, like, if you do that, you can do that as an instructor. But if you do, you're going to find that you get the nastiest reviews on Rate My Professor. The students don't know what's going on. And a lot of them start to decide, well, I'm going to use alternative methods to succeed, right? Maybe even unethical ones, right? And so I think that you don't want to create an environment where you can't cover the content, you expect them to cover it on their own, but then you don't give them a resource that's tailored to their skill set, right? And so if I give you a textbook and don't give you any videos or any tutorials to go through that, or to maybe even explain that information, you're almost setting the classroom up where the learning is not taking place, but assessments still are. And that usually is not a great tool for growth and development.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like specifically one of the problems that you were trying to solve was, how do I continue with assessment while also creating an environment of learning that can support them to actually succeed on those assessments?
Right, right. Because you can cover chapters all day. That doesn't mean they're learning them, right? Like
Right.
you can assign a chapter, but that doesn't mean they're getting it, right? And you
Yep.
want to give the tools necessary. And so if you notice that all of your students are on their phone and they watch videos, they watch YouTube, they watch Instagram, they watch, if you notice that all of your students respond decently well to video content, why wouldn't you give them some type of video-based tool?
Makes sense. So for the professors out there that have maybe never heard of Clutch Prep, it would be great if we could dig in a little bit more into the details of specifically how are you using Clutch Prep, and if you could just maybe, like briefly describe the tools that Clutch Prep is offering that you're using, and how you're using them. That would be really helpful.
So I'm using the video chapters because what they do is they help introduce the content and reaffirm the content. So I can either use it to, hey, look at these chapters and then let's come to class and talk. Or I can use it from a perspective of, all right, I'm gonna introduce it and now this is going to reaffirm it, right? So either way, it gives the students sort of a sense of what's going on in the class. And then I can assign the homework problems, the interactive homework, as homework, and it gives the students confidence that they know how to actually use that information in a question, right? And that's really important. And you can go in and edit the questions. It grades it for you. You can assign due dates. So it really makes it, it's easy on both sides in terms of the information is accessible for the student and the practice is there, as well as a teacher, it's just easy to do anything from grading to editing.
Yep. So just to recap, it sounds like you're using the textbook specific video chapter videos to reinforce content within the classroom. And then
Yes.
you're also using the video based homework assessments to basically help students to practice these concepts in a way where they're getting feedback through these videos.
Right, right. Because feedback before the test is important, right? The last thing you want to do is give 4 tests and they don't get any feedback until, they have 4 times feedback a year and then they're mad at you because, they're upset about their progress, right? But maybe you could have put out that fire before if you had that interactive homework.
Makes sense. So what do you think at this point of the semester, having used the Clutch Prep platform for, I would say, over a month now, what would you say are the strengths of the Clutch Prep platform that you're observing so far?
The strengths are autonomy. It's pretty seamless in terms of I assign the chapter, they watch the chapter, they do the problems, and I can look to see their progress, right? So being able to monitor the progress and see who is and isn't doing their homework. You can even see who's done their homework before the test, right? So if they come back and don't do well on the test, you can always say, hey, you didn't do your homework, right? And it just lets you sort of, it's almost a seamless integration with your actual lecture, right? And that part is really nice.
Wonderful. What do you think, based on whatever feedback you've gotten so far from students, what do you think that your students like about using Clutch Prep?
It puts the class into their hands, right? It puts their education back into their hands, because at that point, I have students that have already started 2 chapters ahead, and what they love about Clutch Prep is that they don't have to wait for me to understand content, right? They don't have to wait for me to get it, and it gives them an opportunity to understand it on their own, right? And instead of me becoming just the only, like they say, you give somebody a fish, right, and they eat for the day, and you teach them how to fish and they'll eat for life, right? And as they get to fish for themselves, right? And I can guide that process, but I am no longer giving fish away, right? And I think that's really important, and that's what I like about what the students are getting.
Wonderful. So now we've talked about the problems that you were experiencing before Clutch Prep and how kind of what motivated you to test out Clutch Prep. Do you have any evidence so far to believe that Clutch Prep is actually helping you solve those problems?
So yes, qualitative, absolutely. As I try to move forward in the class, my Clutch Prep class is much more ready and they're much more prepared. I can go into my Clutch Prep class and just start working problems. If I go into my non-Clutch Prep class and I just assign them a chapter or assign them content, I can't just start working problems. They won't know what's going on. They'll even complain, right? Like, and they'll panic, right? So I think there's a huge difference in sort of what the students are familiar with and what they're comfortable with, how quickly they answer questions in class, and even you'll see a sort of an edge on the quiz performance, right? The clutch advantage, and I just think that it's really important. For the students to have some type of content that is, like I said, tailored for the way they've grown up, to give them that information.
Are there any noticeable differences in grades or outcomes that you're able to share in maybe an informal way that maybe it's not, it's not perfectly statistically significant, but
Right.
maybe just anecdotally?
If anecdotally, if I wanted to say there's a clutch advantage, the clutch advantage might be around, let's say, 5% points, right? Without doing a real like full out study, I would
Right,
just spitball number, half a letter grade, right? Just off the bat. And it might even be bigger than that, but, you just have to see, and, maybe one day we'll get to a study, right? But
right.
until then, I can definitely see that there's a difference in performance.
Right. Yep. So again, the sample size could be a lot bigger. We need to wait for more data to come in and
Right.
obviously control for all the different confounding variables. But anecdotally, you're starting to see a story within these, patterns developed within these two sections that show that maybe there's like a
Absolutely.
half letter grade and a clutch advantage.
Absolutely. There's no question at this point whether there's an advantage. It's just a matter of, can you create the study that shows what you already see, right?
Right.
I would challenge any professor, like if they actually tried it out, they would immediately see a difference.
Wonderful. Do you see clutch prep? Do you happen to see clutch prep solving any unintended problems that maybe you didn't go into the semester thinking this was a problem, but clutch prep is helping in a different way that you didn't even expect?
I think it does. For example, if you want to change your class structure, right? It just gives you the freedom to do it. You can go to a structure of, we're going to work problems in class, or we're going to go through extra, it just gives you absolute freedom because you have both the chapter videos that are giving you the content. So you don't have to cover content, right? And then it also gives you the problems that you can work through, or the students have already worked through. So even if you just cover content in class, you never actually have to work through problems. And for chemistry, most of our work is in those areas, right? Like, you're either teaching the students content or you're teaching them how to apply it. So you can even go in class and just have a discussion, a Q&A. You can go in class and you can have them write papers, or, you can do just about anything you want to in class, because you're getting the support of lectures and of working problems outside of class.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. So, what advice would you give to maybe another chemistry or other chemistry professors out there who are responsible to teach students during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Try it. Just try it. I don't know if there's a million other resources like this. This is the first one I've heard, right? And I think that it's worth a try, right? I know it's easy to sit in convention, but these are unconventional times, right? There's nothing you're gonna do that's normal about this time. And so if you just decide, hey, even mid-semester, if you say, you know what, I'm gonna sign my students up and they're gonna do the last 4 chapters through Clutch Prep, you'll see the difference, right? Like, just sometimes as life gives you lemons, they say make lemonade, right? And in this pandemic, like, as stress happens and things happen, if you can make some lemonade out of it by trying something new, go for it.
Awesome. Well, Matt, this was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience of Clutch Prep with your classrooms. And we are looking forward to continuing to help your students succeed and hopefully getting more data so that we can build a like an actual uh,
Okay, right.
yeah, an actual study sometime
Right.
soon.
Publish the Clutch Advantage, right?
Publish the Clutch Advantage.
Okay.
Exactly. All right. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Take care.